The sound system cracked like a gunshot as Kanye West stopped mid-verse, the beat still thumping behind him, but his voice silenced. The stadium, packed with tens of thousands of fans, seemed to inhale all at once, waiting, watching, knowing something was about to happen. He had been performing flawlessly, delivering each lyric with the force of a man who had nothing to prove but everything to say. And yet, in the middle of it all, someone, had thrown it off balance. It wasn't just a distraction. It was a challenge. "You're a joke, Kanye." The words sliced through the air, cutting through the sea of voices, through the bass, through the adrenaline surging through the crowd. It wasn't just heckling. It wasn't just noise. It was sharp, intentional, and it had been hurled with the kind of venom that begged for a reaction. Kanye stood still, his chest rising and falling, his grip on the microphone tightening, his eyes scanning the faces below him, searching for the source. Fans in the front row turned, some glaring, others uncomfortable, some pretending they hadn't heard anything at all. There he was, a young man, maybe mid-20s, standing just a few rows from the front, his arms crossed over his expensive jacket, an arrogant smirk carved onto his face like he had just won something, like he had just proven a point. People around him were tense, some whispering, others backing away as if they wanted no part of whatever was about to happen. His posture was cocky, his expression daring, his words still lingering in the air like smoke from a fire that had just been lit. Kanye exhaled slowly, lowering the mic from his lips, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the tension to coil tighter, thickening the air. The beat continued behind him, looping, waiting for him to pick it back up, to ignore it, to move on. That's what most performers would do. That's what a celebrity was supposed to do. Laugh it off, pretend it didn't matter, let security handle it, move on like nothing happened. But Kanye wasn't most performers. And this was different. He lifted the mic back to his lips, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Say that again." The words weren't loud, but they didn't have to be. They carried weight. They hung in the air, challenging, daring the heckler to repeat himself. The crowd murmured, shifting restlessly, some leaning in closer, others pulling out their phones, sensing something real, something unscripted, something that wasn't part of the show but was about to become the only thing anyone would talk about. The man didn't hesitate. If anything, his smirk deepened, his chest puffing out slightly, his stance widening like he had been waiting for this moment. "I said, you're a joke, Kanye." His voice was even louder this time, filled with something between mockery and certainty, like he was speaking a truth that everyone else was too afraid to say. "All that talent, all that money, and you still act like the world owes you something." A few gasps scattered through the audience, hushed voices murmuring, people nudging each other, eyes darting from the heckler to Kanye, waiting for the explosion. It wasn't just about an insult anymore. This was something deeper, something personal, something designed to wound. And yet, Kanye didn't move. He didn't yell, didn't lash out, didn't do what they all expected. Instead, he did something that was somehow even more unsettling. He smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It wasn't an amused smile. It was the kind of smile that made people nervous, that made them rethink their choices, that carried the weight of 1,000 battles fought in the public eye. It was the smile of a man who had been torn apart by headlines, ridiculed by people who had never created anything in their lives, dragged through the mud and expected to stay down. But he never did. And he never would. "You really think that, huh?" His voice was calm, too calm, like he was about to let the man in on something he wasn't ready to hear. "You paid all that money, fought through all those people, just to come here and tell me that? You really thought you'd be the first person to say that to my face?" The smirk on the heckler's face faltered, just slightly, just enough for those close enough to see it. "That's cute," Kanye continued, pacing slowly, dragging out the moment, making sure every person in that stadium was locked in. "Let me ask you something. What did you do today? Huh? What did you create? What did you build? What did you put your heart into?" He paused, tilting his head. "Or did you just wake up, open Twitter, and decide the highlight of your life was going to be showing up here and hoping I'd notice you?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, not mocking, not cruel, but sharp and knowing, the kind of laughter that came from people who had seen this play out before, who had watched haters throw stones at greatness while never lifting a finger to build anything of their own. The heckler's face darkened, his smirk fading, his confidence shifting, his eyes darting around like he was suddenly aware of how many people were watching him. Kanye didn't stop. "You think I act like the world owes me something?" His voice was heavier now, filled with something deeper than anger. "Nah, man. The world never gave me anything. You think I was handed this? You think they wanted me to be here? You think they let a black man from Chicago walk into these rooms without trying to tear him apart first?" He took a step closer to the edge of the stage, his presence towering, unshakable. "I had to fight for every single thing I have. Every song, every deal, every dollar. And the second I made it, people like you showed up, trying to tell me I didn't deserve it." The stadium was silent now, the kind of silence that felt heavy, that felt like everyone had stopped breathing, waiting for what came next. "And you know what the difference is between me and you?" Kanye's voice dropped lower, forcing the heckler to lean in, forcing everyone to listen. "I took every doubt, every insult, every headline that said I was finished, and I turned it into something real. Something that lasts. Something that's bigger than me. But you? You're just here, hoping your little moment of hate gets you 5 seconds of attention. And in 5 minutes, no one's gonna remember your name." The words hit like a tidal wave, crashing down with the weight of years, with the force of someone who had spent his whole life proving people wrong. The crowd roared, deafening, electrified, not just because they were on his side, but because they felt it, because they had seen it, because they understood that this wasn't just about Kanye West. This was about anyone who had ever been underestimated, dismissed, torn down by someone who had never dared to create anything of their own. The heckler stood there, stunned, small, exposed in a way he hadn't expected to be. He opened his mouth, maybe to respond, maybe to defend himself, but Kanye was already turning away, already lifting the mic back to his lips, already commanding the music to take over again. And just like that, the beat dropped, the crowd exploded, and the show went on. The beat slammed back into the stadium like a shockwave, but for a moment, the energy didn't pick up the way it was supposed to. The tension still hung there, thick, unmoving, as if the air itself hadn't caught up to what had just happened. Kanye stepped back from the edge of the stage, turning his back to the crowd for half a second, lifting his mic again as if nothing had happened, but everyone knew something had changed. The audience was still buzzing from the moment, half of them energized, half of them trying to process what they had just witnessed. Security had started moving toward the heckler, their black shirts parting the crowd as they zeroed in on him. But before they could reach him, Kanye turned back around, held up a hand, and without saying a word, stopped them. They hesitated, glancing at each other, waiting for confirmation. He nodded once. They stepped back. People near the heckler were still watching him, some whispering, some laughing under their breath. But there was something different in the way they looked at him now. A few minutes ago, he had been just another face in the crowd, someone blending into the chaos of the night. But now he was something else. He had wanted attention, and he had gotten it, but not in the way he expected. His face was red now, his body stiff, his eyes darting between the stage and the people around him like he was realizing, too late, that he had lost control of the moment he had started. He took a step back, but there was nowhere to go. Kanye raised the mic again, and for a second, it looked like he was just going to go back to the set list, just going to let the music carry everything away. But then he did something no one expected. He looked straight at the man again, pointed, and spoke over the music. "Come up here." The words didn't match the beat. They weren't part of the show. They cut through everything else, silencing whatever noise was still left. The heckler's smirk was completely gone now, his face frozen in something between shock and fear. A few people around him murmured, some gasped, some shook their heads in disbelief. Security glanced at Kanye again, waiting for clarification, and when he nodded once more, they moved, but not toward the heckler to throw him out. They moved to clear a path. Nobody understood what was happening. This wasn't how these things went. If a fan interrupted the show, they got removed. If someone caused trouble, security handled it. The performer never acknowledged them, never gave them more than a passing glance before moving on. But Kanye wasn't ignoring it. He wasn't letting it go. He was bringing it right onto the stage, forcing it into the light, making sure that whatever had started in the shadows didn't stay there. For a second, the heckler didn't move. He stood there, frozen, his bravado slipping, the weight of tens of thousands of eyes pressing down on him. He could have refused. He could have shaken his head, waved it off, tried to disappear back into the crowd. But if he did that, he knew exactly what it would look like. He had challenged Kanye West in front of the world, and now Kanye was challenging him back. And if he backed down, he wouldn't just look like a fool, he would be one. Slowly, stiffly, he moved forward. The crowd split as security guided him toward the stage, some people cheering, some jeering, some recording every second of it. The cameras zoomed in on him, broadcasting his face on the massive screens above the stage. And for the first time, he didn't look like someone who had control of the moment. He looked like someone who had made a mistake and realized it too late. Kanye didn't move as the guy climbed onto the stage, didn't flinch as he stepped forward, didn't break eye contact. The energy had shifted again, but not the way people expected. It wasn't angry. It wasn't a confrontation. It was something else. Something heavier. Something uncomfortable in a way that made people hold their breath. "What's your name?" Kanye asked, his voice even, steady. For the first time, the guy hesitated. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then, finally, he forced the words out. "Jason." Kanye nodded, took a step forward, microphone still in hand. "All right, Jason," he said. "You said I'm a joke. You said I act like the world owes me something." He tilted his head slightly, studying him. "So tell me, why are you here? Why'd you come to my show?" Jason shifted on his feet, glancing at the crowd, his confidence cracking more with every second. I used to be a fan," he said, but his voice wasn't as strong as it had been before. "I liked your old stuff. Before all the bullshit." A murmur rippled through the audience. Some people scoffed, some nodded, but Kanye didn't react. He just kept looking at him, his expression unreadable. "Before what?" Jason swallowed. "Before you started acting crazy. Before you started talking like you were the greatest of all time. Before you." He stopped himself, shaking his head. "You changed, man. You used to be about the music." Kanye let the words sit in the air for a moment. He could have reacted instantly, could have cut Jason down in front of everyone, but he didn't. He let the weight of it settle first. "You ever lost everything?" Kanye asked suddenly. Jason blinked. "What? You ever lost everything?" Kanye repeated. "Had the whole world turn on you? Had people who used to love you suddenly act like you never meant shit? You ever had your family ripped apart in front of you? Had people take your words, twist them, use them to make you the villain in their story?" Jason didn't answer. He just stood there, shoulders tense, jaw tight. "That's the problem," Kanye said. "Y'all think you know me. You don't know me. You know the headlines. You know the clips. You know the version of me that gets passed around so people got something to talk about. But you don't know what it's like to live inside this. You don't know what it's like to wake up every day and have to fight to be yourself when everyone's telling you who they think you are." Jason opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, but Kanye cut him off before he could. "You came here thinking you could say something to me that I haven't heard before," Kanye said. "But you ain't got nothing new. You're just another voice in a crowd full of people who think they know me better than I know myself." He took one last step forward, standing right in front of Jason now, the entire stadium locked in on the moment. "So let me ask you one last thing." Jason swallowed hard. "What?" Kanye's eyes didn't leave his. "Why do you care so much?" Jason flinched, just barely, just enough for anyone watching closely to see it. He didn't have an answer. Or maybe he did, but he wasn't ready to say it. And for the first time since this started, it wasn't Kanye who looked in control. It was the truth. Jason's lips parted like he wanted to say something, but nothing came out. The energy in the stadium had shifted again, heavier now, pressing down on him in a way he hadn't expected. The people in the crowd weren't laughing anymore, weren't whispering, weren't treating this like entertainment. They were waiting to see if he had an answer, waiting to see if there was anything behind the words he had shouted. But he wasn't sure anymore. When he had said it, it had felt simple. He had been watching Kanye for years, watching him change, watching him say things that pissed people off, watching him move in ways that didn't make sense, and somewhere along the way, that frustration had turned into something else, something he hadn't even realized was sitting inside him until now. But now, standing on the stage, looking Kanye in the eye, that frustration didn't feel as sharp anymore. It felt tangled, messy, mixed with something he wasn't sure he was ready to admit. Kanye didn't push him. He didn't rush him. He just stood there, waiting, giving him space to speak if he wanted to. But Jason didn't know what to say. He had spent years thinking he knew exactly what the problem was, that it was about Kanye being arrogant, about him saying the wrong things, about him acting like he was bigger than everyone else. But now, for the first time, he wondered if it had been about something else entirely. If maybe the problem hadn't been Kanye. Maybe the problem had been that Kanye had changed, and Jason hadn't. Jason took a breath, trying to steady himself, trying to gather the words that wouldn't come. "I don't know," he admitted, and the second he said it, the weight in his chest shifted. The crowd didn't cheer, didn't react, didn't turn this into a spectacle. They just listened. Kanye nodded once, like he had expected that. "You ever built something?" Jason frowned, caught off guard by the question. "What?" Kanye didn't blink. "You ever built something? A song, a business, a movement? You ever put your heart into something so deep that it became part of you?" Jason hesitated. "No." Kanye tilted his head slightly. "Then you don't get it," he said, not in a way that was condescending, not in a way that was dismissive, but in a way that made it clear there were things Jason would never understand until he had walked through them himself. "You're standing on the outside looking in. You think you know me, but you only know what you've been shown. You don't know the nights I didn't sleep because I was chasing something bigger than myself. You don't know what it's like to put everything on the line, to have the world tell you you're wrong, and to keep going anyway. You don't know what it feels like to lose everything, to have people turn on you, to watch your own life get twisted into something you barely recognize. You don't know what it takes to get back up when everyone's betting against you." Jason looked away for a second, swallowing hard, feeling something in his chest that he didn't like, something that made him uncomfortable because it wasn't anger anymore. It was understanding. Kanye didn't let up. "You say you like my old music, right? The old Kanye? You think that was me before I changed? Nah, man. That was me before you knew what I was going through. I've always been this. You just liked me better when I wasn't saying the things that made you uncomfortable." Jason's hands clenched at his sides. "That's not true," he said, but his voice wasn't as sure as before. Kanye raised an eyebrow. "Isn't it? You liked me when I was making music that spoke to your struggles, but when I started speaking to my own, you didn't want to hear it. You liked me when I was the underdog, but the second I started acting like I knew my worth, you thought I was arrogant. You liked me when I was making beats you could vibe to, but when I started making statements that forced people to think, you called it bullshit." He took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Jason could hear, though the weight of his words still carried through the entire stadium. "You ever ask yourself why that is?" Jason exhaled sharply, shaking his head, because he didn't have an answer to that. He didn't want to admit that maybe Kanye was right, that maybe he had been holding on to something, some version of Kanye that wasn't real, some idea of who he thought he was supposed to be, and when that version started to disappear, he had turned on him instead of trying to understand why. Kanye let the silence sit for a moment before speaking again. "You don't have to like me," he said, his voice steady, calm, with no anger behind it. "You don't have to agree with me. But don't stand here and act like you know me better than I know myself. Don't act like you understand my journey when you've never walked anything close to it." Jason's shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time, the fight in his eyes wasn't there anymore. It wasn't defeat. It was realization. Kanye turned back toward the crowd, raising the mic again, his voice carrying over the stadium with the force of someone who had nothing left to prove. "Y'all think you know people because of what you see online. You think you know their hearts because of a headline, because of a clip, because of something taken out of context. You don't know shit. You don't know what it's like to live under a microscope, to have your mistakes turned into entertainment, to have your lowest moments used as proof that you're not who you say you are. And the craziest part? Y'all don't even want the truth. You want a version of the truth that fits what you already believe." The crowd erupted, not in wild cheers, but in something deeper, something that came from people who had felt what he was saying in their own way, in their own lives. Kanye turned back to Jason one last time. "You got your moment," he said. "You got to say what you wanted to say. But now, I want you to think about why you felt the need to say it in the first place." Jason nodded once, not speaking, not arguing, just standing there, taking it in. And Kanye, without another word, turned back to the crowd, lifted the mic, and let the music take over again, drowning out everything else, leaving nothing but the weight of what had just happened hanging in the air. Jason stood there for a few more seconds, frozen, caught between who he had been when he walked into the stadium and who he was now. And as security finally let him off stage, he wasn't sure which version of himself he believed in anymore. Jason was still in shock as security let him off stage, his feet moving but his mind stuck, replaying everything that had just happened. The adrenaline that had fueled him minutes ago was gone, replaced with something unfamiliar, something unsettling. He had never felt smaller in his life. The roar of the music behind him, the weight of the crowd's eyes still on him, the cameras that had captured every second. He wasn't sure what had just happened, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't the same person who had walked into this stadium. The second his sneakers hit the concrete floor of the backstage area, one of the security guards let out a breath, giving him a look that wasn't quite sympathy, but wasn't judgment either. "You good?" he asked, his voice low enough that the crowd wouldn't hear. Jason nodded, even though he wasn't sure if it was true. "Yeah," he muttered, running a hand through his hair, his body still buzzing with the energy of the moment. I don't know, man." The guard studied him for a second, then shrugged. "Never seen him do that before," he admitted. "Could have had you thrown out, could have ignored you, but he brought you up there instead. Guess he wanted you to hear it straight from him." Jason swallowed hard, nodding again, even though it didn't feel real. He had come here expecting a concert. He had left his house thinking he was going to have a good time, maybe get drunk, maybe laugh at Kanye's latest antics. He had never expected this. He had never expected to be standing here, backstage at a show he had almost ruined, feeling like he had just been forced to look at something inside himself he had spent years ignoring. The guard gestured toward the side exit. "You can go back to your seat if you want," he said. "But if you're going to cause more problems, I'd leave now before we have to actually kick you out." Jason barely even heard him. His mind was too full, his body still running on whatever mix of emotions had taken over him the second Kanye had turned the attention back on him. Without answering, he pushed open the door and stepped out into the hallway, away from the noise of the stadium, away from the stage, away from everything. But not away from what had just happened. His hands were shaking as he reached for his phone, unlocking it, and immediately seeing the flood of notifications. His name was already trending. Clips of him on stage were everywhere. The comments were mixed, some calling him an idiot, some calling him brave, some saying he got exactly what he deserved. His friends had texted him a dozen times, some laughing, some asking him what the hell he was thinking. He stared at the screen, his own face frozen mid-sentence in a screenshot, and for the first time in his life, he didn't want the attention. He had thought this would be his moment, had thought that calling Kanye out would make him feel powerful, would make him feel like he had done something important. Instead, all he felt was exposed. A door swung open down the hall, and Jason glanced up, expecting security, expecting someone to tell him to leave, but instead, it was someone he never thought he would see up close. Kanye. No cameras, no entourage, no security guards hovering over him. Just Kanye, standing there in the dim light of the hallway, his energy completely different from how it had been on stage. Jason's heart hammered in his chest, because what the hell was he supposed to do now? He had already embarrassed himself in front of thousands of people. Was Kanye about to finish the job in private? But Kanye didn't look mad. He didn't even look annoyed. He just looked at Jason for a second, then tilted his head toward the door. "You still here?" Jason hesitated, then shoved his phone into his pocket, clearing his throat. "Yeah." Kanye nodded slowly, stepping forward, his presence still massive even without the stage beneath him. "Why'd you come to the show?" Jason exhaled, suddenly exhausted, suddenly aware of how much this night had drained him. "I don't know," he admitted, the words feeling heavier than he expected. "Guess I just wanted to see if you were still the same guy I used to look up to." Kanye watched him for a long moment, then crossed his arms, leaning slightly against the wall. "And?" Jason let out a humorless laugh, shaking his head. "I don't even know anymore." Kanye was quiet for a second, then nodded like he understood. "People want you to stay who they think you are," he said finally. "But that's not how life works." Jason swallowed, looking down at the floor because hearing it out loud made it even worse. "I guess I just..." He trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence, not sure if he even wanted to. Kanye didn't push him. He just let the silence sit between them, let Jason feel the weight of it, let him figure out what he wanted to do with it. After a few seconds, Jason finally looked back up, meeting Kanye's eyes. "I didn't think you'd call me up there." Kanye's lips twitched like he wanted to smirk, but he didn't. "Neither did I." Jason snorted, shaking his head again, because the whole night felt surreal now. He had spent years talking shit about Kanye, years convincing himself that he had him figured out, and yet here he was, standing face to face with him. realizing that he had never really known anything at all. Kanye pushed off the wall, his gaze still locked on Jason, his expression unreadable. "Don't let people tell you who you are," he said simply. "Not me. Not them. Figure it out yourself." Jason didn't know how to respond to that, didn't know if he even had the right to after everything that had happened. But as Kanye turned and walked back toward the stage, disappearing through the door without another word, Jason felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like he had the answers. And maybe that was a good thing. Jason stood in the empty hallway long after Kanye disappeared through the door, the distant thump of the music still vibrating through the walls, but the energy that had filled him earlier was gone. His hands were still in his pockets, his mind replaying every second of what had just happened, every word that had been said, every moment that had shifted the way he saw things. The reality of it all was sinking in now, heavier than he had expected. He had walked into this stadium thinking he knew exactly who Kanye West was, thinking he had him figured out, thinking he was just another celebrity who had let fame warp him into something unrecognizable. But standing face to face with him, hearing him speak without cameras, without an audience to perform for, without the persona that people either worshipped or mocked, Jason realized he had never actually understood him at all. He glanced down at his phone again, saw the endless notifications still rolling in, saw his name trending, saw people dissecting his every movement, every word, turning it into another piece of internet content to be consumed, debated, and forgotten in a matter of days. But he wasn't sure he cared anymore. A few hours ago, he would have been obsessed with reading every comment, arguing back, defending himself, making sure people knew his side. Now it all just felt empty, like it didn't matter, like it never had. The door at the end of the hall swung open again, and for a second, Jason thought Kanye had come back, but it was security, the same guard who had led him backstage, watching him with a look that wasn't quite impatience, but was definitely close. "You staying back here all night, or you heading out?" Jason exhaled sharply, pushing his phone back into his pocket and nodding. "Yeah, I'm going." The guard motioned for him to follow, and as they made their way back toward the exit, Jason felt the weight of the night pressing down on him. But it wasn't embarrassment anymore. It wasn't regret. It was something he couldn't name, something unfamiliar, something that made him feel like the ground beneath him had shifted, and he wasn't sure how to walk on it yet. As they reached the exit, Jason hesitated for a second, looking toward the arena doors where the concert was still going, the sound of Kanye's voice carrying through the air like he hadn't just completely changed someone's life in the middle of his own show. He had the chance to go back to his seat, to finish the concert, to pretend like nothing had happened, but he knew that wasn't an option. Not really. The guard noticed his hesitation and raised an eyebrow. "You good?" Jason nodded, even though he wasn't sure if it was true. "Yeah," he said again, then turned toward the exit, stepping out into the cool night air, the sounds of the concert fading behind him, leaving him alone with his thoughts. The parking lot was mostly empty, at least in the VIP section where he had parked earlier, expecting to have a night of fun, expecting to walk out of the concert feeling justified in his opinions, feeling like he had proven something. Now, he wasn't sure what he had even been trying to prove. His car was still sitting there, untouched, waiting, but before he got in, he pulled his phone out one last time, staring at the screen for a long moment before opening his messages. There was one unread text at the top. His brother. "Saw what happened. Call me when you get a second." Jason hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. His brother had been the one person in his life who had always called him out, who had always told him when he was being an idiot, who had never let him hide behind excuses. If he called him now, he knew he wouldn't get sympathy. He wouldn't get validation. He would get the truth. Jason took a deep breath and hit the call button. It rang twice before his brother picked up. So, his voice came through the line, even, calm, but with that edge of amusement that told Jason he had already watched the clips, already knew everything. That was a hell of a way to spend a Friday night. Jason rubbed a hand over his face, leaning against his car. "Yeah," he muttered. "Wasn't really the plan." His brother chuckled. "What was the plan? Go viral for trying to take down Kanye West." Jason exhaled sharply. "I don't know. I thought I had something to say." There was a pause on the other end, then his brother's voice, softer this time. "And now?" Jason stared at the ground, the weight in his chest shifting again, settling into something he still wasn't sure he understood. Now, I don't know what the hell I was even mad about. His brother didn't respond right away, and when he did, his voice was quieter, more thoughtful. You know, when I saw the clip, I thought Kanye was going to rip you apart. But he didn't. He just made you think. Jason let out a dry laugh. Yeah, well, he's good at that. His brother hummed in agreement. So what now? Jason didn't have an answer to that. He had come into the night thinking he knew exactly who Kanye was, thinking he had him figured out, thinking he had the right to call him out in front of thousands of people. But now, he wasn't sure about anything anymore. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice quieter than before. I think I just need to sit with this for a while. His brother didn't press, didn't push, just let the silence sit between them. Then, finally, he said, "That's probably the smartest thing you've said all night." Jason let out a small laugh, shaking his head. Yeah, probably. They sat there for a moment longer before his brother spoke again. Go home, man. Get some sleep. You'll figure it out. Jason nodded, even though his brother couldn't see him. Yeah, all right. They said their goodbyes, and as Jason hung up and slid into his car, the exhaustion finally hit him all at once. His body was tired, his mind was tired, his entire being felt like it had been turned inside out. But as he started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, something inside him felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just changed. And for the first time in a long time, he was okay with not having all the answers.